Here. So thank you for inviting me. Thanks for inviting me. So good morning, everybody. And this will be a quick 15 minutes, and there's a lot of information, but I'll obviously have to keep it high level, but hopefully you'll have a couple takeaways. And if you have any questions afterwards, my contact information is on the slide, the last slide, and love to hear from you if you have any follow-up questions. So let's dive right in. And so first of all, my name is Tony Coccitto. I'm the president with Eklego Workforce Solutions, and we have, a brief overview of who we are. So Eklego is kind of unique. So we work exclusively in the senior living space. So all we do every day is work in the senior living space, and predominantly we work with nonprofits. And so our mission is to have a profound impact on how our partners are able to attract, hire, and sustain their workforce. And so essentially we work alongside of you as a provider on how you go about finding and keeping folks. And so some organizations choose to outsource the recruitment department to us, and we become them in the communities and drive the process system-wide. And other organizations may choose to have us help them be self-sufficient and help really build an internal program. And then finally, a good old-fashioned search. So there's organizations that will look to us to help them find either their next leaders or clinical staff. And so this is something we do every day. Much appreciation for all what you do, especially these days. And so thank you for everything that you do. So enough about Eklego. So let's dive right into some of the top five areas. And so what I'm going to be focusing on today briefly is getting into the workforce planning, the adequate infrastructure, some of the best practices of what an infrastructure looks like, the metrics, the performance metrics that we should be honing in on. That's impactful. A little bit on the recruitment, marketing, and branding efforts, and key things to keep in mind when you're putting together a program. And then finally, my most favorite these days is the candidate experience. And so workforce planning is, as much of you should know, you have to have a plan in the beginning, meaning what is the bucket of jobs that your organization will need to make on an annual basis, and based on position and location. So really knowing what that bucket of jobs up front would be, and then having a recruitment strategy that's really going to help meet those operational goals. And so that's what we find is the workforce plan can be overlooked at times because it's such a fluid type of practice, meaning things change day to day, week to week. And so understanding those ebbs and flows of what ideally staff looks like today, whether you are looking at your staffing on a budget standpoint or on a census standpoint, really knowing by job title what you need to be ideally staffed. And so that's where everything starts. Without that, you're going to definitely have a challenge of meeting your goals. So adequate infrastructure. So what do we mean by that? And so what we look at when we look at the infrastructure, we're looking at the people, process, and tools. And so when it comes to people, and people, it's not just HR. And so when we look at the adequate infrastructure from a people perspective, first and foremost, it's going to be your recruitment team, whether it's one recruiter or a team of recruiters. When you're looking to hire and retain an A-player recruiter, that's obviously a critical piece. And so recruitment these days is very sales driven. It's somebody who's going to have a high sense of urgency, somebody who has the ability to multitask and just be able to work closely with all team that's involved in the process, from your hiring managers to senior leadership. And so it's a tough find these days, so finding and keeping a top-notch recruiter, but it certainly is something where is becoming more and more prevalent these days. And so having the right people in the right roles is really the overarching theme, is when you're looking to build the people that's involved in the recruitment and hiring process. And then the expectations we're finding as well is something where, do people know, when you define success for each role, what does that look like? And so that gets into a little bit about the hiring process and the expectations everyone should have at each step of the process. So it really ties into who owns what, and everyone should really be accountable for their piece of the process. Speaking of process, and so this is a big thing for us and all of our partners that we work with, is you need to have a process first and foremost. And when I say hiring process, it's really the steps from requisition all the way to onboarding. And so having a process, trusting that process, and holding everybody accountable for their step in each step in the process. And so, we find that if you don't have a real defined process that hold everybody accountable, things start to fall apart. And so in your process, highly recommend to include who owns each step in the process, and what is the expectations and fulfillment. How long should each step take? And what are the very specific steps that should be taken within each step of the process? And then tools. So tools can mean a lot of things. And so when we're looking at the recruitment and hiring process, when we're looking at tools, it's certainly you're gonna focus on your website, social media, digital marketing. When I say digital marketing, I mean that can mean various things, from geofencing to banner advertisements to just good old-fashioned messaging that's out there in various medium. So those are the things you really want to break down when you're looking to build your infrastructure. It's going to be essentially those people, process, and tools. Key things you want to be factoring in when you are building an internal program. Metrics. So performance metrics shouldn't be uncommon in the world of healthcare. But when we're talking recruitment and hiring, we see various levels of involvement in regards to having a very specific performance metrics system. And so the metric is going to be stemming off of your applicant tracking system. And so the applicant tracking system really allows you to streamline your process and communication. But within the ATS, there should be various tasks that needs to be completed that ultimately you could run reports and be able to determine, what's working and what's not working and how long will it take. And so having the ATS utilized correctly and really optimize that tool will help really make it easy in a sustainable way to measure each deliverable. And one thing to keep in mind when it comes to goals and metrics is you need to make sure you're keeping the most important things the most important. And so what are things within the process that's going to create action? And so, for example, some examples that we look in our partnerships on performance metrics is, first and foremost, your number of positions, right? That's the obvious one you want to be tracking by position, by location. And then how many applicants is a typical, obviously, number of applicants, but how many of them are actually qualified and engaged and responsive? And another common metrics that we track is interview to offer ratio. So out of all the people that are applying, that are being pre-screened, how many of those applicants are actually conducting an interview, and how many of them are actually getting an offer? And so what we're finding for interview to offer ratio, 70% is a typical goal for us to have at least 70%. That really shows that the front end pre-screening is being done, and your managers are then taking their next step and selecting the right people. So we don't expect a 90% interview to offer ratio. If that's the case, they're probably offering anybody that they're interviewing. So I think we find that 7% is a pretty common goal. 80% I think would be the optimal interview to offer ratio. So the next category in regards to key things to really monitor and track in your program is your recruitment marketing and branding. So recruitment marketing and branding, it's not just, and I think for our focus, it's not just what your logo looks like, what your website looks like, but it's really everything involved from when an application is being completed by the candidate all the way through to onboarding and when they actually start. And so what is that experience for that candidate? And just, again, keep in mind, what we're finding in more and more these days is marketing and HR are working much more collaboratively these days. So marketing is no longer just an admissions-driven effort. You know, HR recruitment is really being tied in to the marketing strategy for organizations these days. And it doesn't have to be viewed as a negative. I think the positioning nowadays is, if you're an employer of choice, if you're an organization that truly provides an environment that's nurturing and supportive, those people are going to provide great service and support to your residents. And so the messaging should go hand in hand on what we're all trying to achieve. And so what's your competitive advantage? And so what we're finding is identify, why should people work for you versus your competition, and understand what is your competitive advantage, meaning, you know, besides being a nonprofit and faith-based, which has always been historically a key differentiator among your against your competitors, but there needs to be more than that. So what we're finding is having desirable jobs will translate into more hireable candidates. And so what is a desirable job? And that's where things have changed over the last couple of years. And so a desirable job, you know, the most common things that you're probably very aware of is you have to pay competitively. If you're not competitive in your pay, you'll be challenged. And so certainly we're finding organizations increasing their pay rates multiple times a year versus annually. So we're seeing organizations assess their pay scales on a quarterly basis, which is ideally long-term. This is not sustainable, but this is where we're at today. And so is need to be competitive. People want to work when they want to work, and there needs to be flexibility. And so having a pay competitiveness, providing them options and flexibility, which can mean various things. And then ultimately, which I think we're all have the biggest advantage, is providing an environment that's nurturing and supportive. Because ultimately, if you can do those three things, you'll be best positions in your community to serve. Okay, I know we're getting down to 10:15 right now, so real key on candidate experience. Keep in mind, think about the whole process from when somebody first applies. What's their experience when they apply? How easy is it for them? What's the messaging that they're reading? Are you conveying that culture that you ultimately are? And then how long does it take to communicate within each step? And so what's that, are you making deeper connections with candidates when you first talk to them, when you're first on the phone with them, when they're coming in to interview? Are you present as a hiring manager? Are you engaged? Are you listening? They're interviewing you just like you're interviewing them. And so what we're saying is best practices is having people who are true ambassadors of your organization are the people that should be interviewing your future employees. And so having fully engaged managers who are then going to really represent the organization. And then finally, that what's being overlooked, less so nowadays, is what is your onboarding practice? How engaged is HR and your managers when employees are accepting those job offers? And so really have a hand-holding, very high-touch customer service way of onboarding people versus just having a task that you're trying to complete. Use that as an opportunity to leverage you as an organization as an employer of choice. And so we're finding that if you're paying attention to those details and making sure that candidate experience is at the center through the whole interview and hiring process, you'll make more hires, and you're going to be planting the right seeds. So when people sit in the seat in the orientation, the goal is they should be happy and excited to be there. And if they're not, you'll lose them within a month or 3 months. And so we're finding if that's an area that you're honing in on, you'll certainly make an impact. And so those are, again, a lot more we can discuss, but in the 15 minutes, that's pretty much what we can cover. But hopefully this is gonna trigger a little bit of thoughts on your end. And if you have any questions or thoughts, please, I'd love to hear from you. My contact information is is right here, as you can see. So I appreciate this opportunity. And again, thanks for having me, sir. I appreciate it.